Today I'm going to show you how I modeled, printed, and finished Donut's crown from Dungeon Crawler Carl. Welcome back to the channel, I'm Kevin, and I am a big Dungeon Crawler Carl fan. I've read the books multiple times, and now that the webtoon is out, we actually have consistent art for the series, which I have been really looking forward to. I'll probably end up making a number of different things from the series, but I wanted to start with Donut's first crown. I try to keep this channel family friendly, so I'm just going to call this Donut's Crown of Sepsis, but anyone who's read the series will know its full name. I started by going through the webtoon and saving a couple of screenshots, then uploading everything to GIMP, which is my image editing software of choice. I edited together those images into this reference image, which views the crown from the front. I was really lucky in that they showed this from a lot of angles, so I also prepared a reference for the side view. Now these reference images were just one part of this. I also need to figure out what the actual measurements were. Originally, I did a lot of weird searches around the size of a cat's head, but eventually I realized they sell this kind of thing on Amazon, so I just looked through some of the best sellers. I'm gonna be honest, this was a really weird process, but I also kind of loved it. I'm used to extrapolating the size of things based on small details, so instead looking at different cat crowns on Amazon felt really unhinged and truly in the spirit of DCC. Anyways, I decided to make the crown 3 inches in diameter. I measured it out in pixels and figured out that 250 pixels equaled 1 inch, which I rounded to 25 millimeters, since I'm going to be using metric when I'm modeling this. That let me measure and figure out all of the other dimensions. This brought me to the gems, which I knew was going to be a little bit complicated because I wanted to make 2 versions of the crown. The first version was going to have the gems 3D modeled as part of it. I was just going to finish and paint them along with the rest of the crown, like normal. The second version wasn't going to include any gems. I decided I was going to order some plastic ones off of Amazon and try sticking them on. Now, the reason I'm doing this, aside from it sounded interesting, was because I haven't really made stuff like this before, and I wanted to do a couple of experiments because I do see doing more of this type of thing in the future. For the 3D printed gems, it was really easy to get those measurements. The plastic ones from Amazon, however, were going to be a little bit trickier. I can 3D model gems at any size I want, but on Amazon, they only sell these in a couple discrete sizes. To make this work, I had to fudge the numbers a little bit. My lower gem ended up being 18 millimeters high and 12 millimeters wide, instead of 17 by 13.5, which isn't really a big deal. The top gem, on the other hand, ended up being 14 by 10, rather than 10.5 by 7.5, which was a bit more of an issue. At this point, I really had to come to terms with doing a second version of this crown. Normally when I talk about doing multiple versions, I'm really just going in and toggling a piece on and off, and then exporting it again, which takes maybe 30 seconds. In this case, that top gem isn't actually going to fit on this crown unless I go in and remodel parts of this. It's not a huge issue, but it is going to take a little bit of extra effort. At this point, I moved into Blender, which is my 3D modeling software of choice, and spent about 30 minutes on my first attempt before giving up and starting over. Even though I didn't end up using any of this first attempt, I still think it was a valuable part of the process. When I first started 3D modeling a few years ago, I had a lot of trouble conceptualizing how some details would work in 3D. I've steadily improved over the last couple of years as I've done more and more modeling, but I'm still not an expert, and it's not unusual for my first attempts to be more about getting a feel for the item than getting it right on my first try. My second attempt went much better, but I did have some trouble when I started working off of the side view. I've talked before about how the art in manga and webtoons isn't always consistent, and this is yet another example of that. These lower loops actually angle a little bit differently between these two images, which isn't an issue for readers, but is a bit annoying when you're trying to model this. These kinds of inconsistencies are pretty common and generally not a big deal. My problem was that I didn't spot it early, so I kept going from the side view back to the front reference and tweaking things and failing to get it right. It took me a little bit longer than I want to admit to realize there was a discrepancy here. Once I solved that puzzle, I went back and modeled the rest of the crown, which wasn't overly difficult compared to a lot of my other projects, but did involve a lot of small adjustments. Now that the basic design was done, I could start working on my 2 different versions. For the gems, I used spheres, and then decimated them to get clear faces. The subdivision surface modifier, which you've probably heard me talk about a lot, makes things look smoother by taking the existing faces and breaking them up. The decimation modifier does the exact opposite, and while I don't use it anywhere near as much as the subdivision surface modifier, it's still a really handy tool, especially for cases like this. I also copied and pasted the crown, and then made some modifications at the top to accommodate the larger gem I ordered from Amazon. I could have printed these both at once, but I decided to start with just one. I immediately realized that I'd made the band way too thin, and decided to bulk that up a bit. Then I went ahead and printed both versions. Once these were done, I started peeling the supports, which took an annoying amount of time. I also managed to stab myself in the thumb with my clippers, so I was a little bit grumpy for this. This kicked off the longest portion of the project, which was trying to get this nice and smooth. Bright, reflective, metallic colors really bring out every defect in a surface, so I knew I was going to have to put more effort into sanding and finishing this than I would on one of my typical daggers. I started with a primer that had a built-in filler, meaning it would help smooth out the surfaces. This began a cycle of wood filler, sanding, and then adding more primer. I did, I think, 4 or 5 rounds of this, I'm not really sure, and I recorded all of it so I could show you in great detail, but now as I'm actually editing this, I'm realizing it's tremendously boring. So I'm going to give you the cliff notes and then we can move on. The main areas I was focused on were on the underside of the loops, where you could see the individual strands of filament. I'd use a toothpick to apply wood filler just to these areas, and then sand it with some small files and sandpaper, before spraying over it and repeating the process until those areas look just as smooth as the rest of the crown. I have never pushed my finishing process quite this far. I think my results were decent, but after this video goes live, I'll probably do some additional research and see if I can find a way to bring this to the next level on a future project. At this point, with the primer on, I was able to move on to yet another thing I want to try out on these crowns. That's right, I'm using silver spray paint instead of painting everything by hand. A lot of my projects involve metallic details, but they're generally small accents, so I've always painted them on by hand. Since this was essentially all silver, it seemed like a great thing to use spray paint on. This worked really well. I'll have Amazon affiliate links for this and everything else you've seen me use today in the video description down below, in case you want to get the same brands. With this painted, I could start painting the purple on the gems. I started with some metallic purple, but realized that was a terrible idea. I ended up doing 4 or 5 coats of the matte purple before moving on to the metallic, which sounds like a lot, but wasn't that much of a burden. It was such a small area that these coats took me 30 seconds to maybe a minute each. The purple metallic paint was much more visible over this purple background, but still took a couple of coats. For the gems, I scuffed off the back with sandpaper and then used a dab of superglue to secure them. I was worried it would not adhere to this spray painted surface, but it stuck on there really well. I finished both of these off with some matte clear coat. I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. I do wish my finishing had been a little bit better, but I was blown away by how good these gems look. That is the clear winner. If you've stuck with the video this long, I hope you'll give it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or any ideas for what I should make next, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. If you want to get the files to make your own, I'll post it all on Thingiverse, just check the video description for the link. I'll be back next month with another project, so until then,